You and Helldivers 2 has apparently lost 90% of its player base, down from the 460,000 player peak of February down to an average player count of around 45,000 players. However, this is a massive conversation. There are various facets to this, and the decline of the player base was happening before the whole issue around Sony mandating PlayStation Network accounts over on PC. That was a whole talking point across the last month or so, maybe a month and a half or so. The idea that if you want to play Helldivers on PC, you then had to have a PlayStation Network account, and a lot of people just said, I'm just gonna leave it. That then being the assumption that Sony killed Helldivers too. But like I said, the decline was there before, and I do think there's a much bigger conversation to be had about everything that's going into Helldivers 2 and the way that it's been managed. The fact that Arrowhead as a developer didn't see this level of success coming at all. And we'll get to various things. I want to reel off initially that 45,000 people a day is still a very solid number for an ongoing live service game anyway. If you compare it, and obviously, it's worth saying that they don't have an official roadmap. They sort of just keep dropping stuff. They do their best. But there's not an official roadmap for the game. So to still maintain 45,000 people turning up anyway is pretty awesome. But comparatively, Warframe has around 50,000 players. Destiny 2 has around 90,000. GTA Online has 160,000. But on the other end of the scale, you've got Anthem has 1,500 people. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has 13,000 people. And the Avengers game shut down entirely in September last year because not enough people were playing at all. So to bring it back to the roadmap, and I want to get your thoughts, Ewan, because you've played way more Helldivers than I have, and we played a lot of it together, but you've played way more than me. When it comes to the roadmap stuff, at the time, the Arrowhead CEO was Johan Palstar, who he said when the game blew up in February that they had to throw their old roadmap out. He said that our old roadmap is very much out of date in comparison to what we now want to do. Palstar has since been replaced by Shams Georgiani, with Johan now becoming the chief creative officer to focus entirely on creative versus the business side of things. But you literally have a game that blew up exponentially more than they thought it would. How's that felt since launch to now?
It's like, people talk about half-life in terms of like radiation and the half-life of a meme. The faster a meme travels, the quicker it burns out. And Helldivers 2 obviously was more than a meme, but it was the viral it game at the start of 2024. The interesting thing about all of this to me is that it throws up wider conversations about people, gamers demanding a fairer live service. And obviously there have been, hitches and roadblocks that have come along the way since Helldivers 2 launched at the beginning of the year. You mentioned the Sony PSN snafu involving Steam. Obviously that walls off a huge portion of the international player base where PSN just does not exist. But for me, the interesting thing with all of this is that we're so quick to criticize live service games that generate FOMO, you need to get this battle pass, you need to go through it right now, otherwise you don't get to play half the stuff that's in there. We're really critical of these kinds of live service experiences, and Helldivers 2 comes along and offers a fairly equitable approach to that genre, and it hasn't been able to sustain itself. Now, you could point towards the, there are certain progression issues here. I took a couple of weeks off playing it because what they're doing at the minute is that they're releasing one premium war bond a month, which is the stuff you buy with the super credits that you can earn in game quite easily, and then you can go through there and but the thing at the minute is that your medals get capped at 250, and so if you're playing and the major incentive to do the major orders apart from the community aspect is to earn medals, and if you go on missions you're getting other resources like samples, people who've been playing since launch have maxed all those things out. So the thing that's keeping them going is the meta narrative of the game.
I've got a whole thing for the meta. We'll get there.
Which is slowed down considerably. I know that Arrowhead are taking a well-deserved break for the next 4 weeks as well. But my big concern with this, the frustrating thing I feel, is that we had a very positive success story. It blew up hugely. Obviously, no one was expecting it to do that except me. I didn't think it would blow up that massively. I knew it was
you
good.
predicted this.
I knew it would be good, and I knew that it would eat Suicide Squad's lunch, but I did not think it would be as big as it got. My big concern here is investment in live service. Is the ethical, equitable approach going to do enough to keep people's attention? And I think, for a game like Helldivers 2, you probably need a greater investment in terms of the amount of stuff that is coming out, because the new major orders, the twists in the narrative are all really, really cool. But if people don't have stuff to work towards and personally unlock and customize, there are loads of quality of life improvements that I know that they'll be able to make, and that'll probably bring people back. But on a base level, it does kind of feel like people have just kind of slowly ebbed away. And like you mentioned, 45,000 players a day isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. But having seen where it was at, it is slightly... It's a little sad if I'm on my Super Red Destroyer and I'm seeing there's less players playing, there's less time to complete major orders, less coordination. So on that front, it's frustrating. I hope it can bounce back.
Yeah, I want to clarify as well that obviously Sony don't release their player numbers. All these numbers are Steam numbers, but the game is cross-platform. So however that manifests in regards to having multiple accounts or whatever the hell. But still, it is very much a window into the reality of how many people are still playing Helldivers many months on. Like I said, there are other things to talk about though. There's things to throw in here like the performance issues. Like obviously the game was dogged by it at launch. You couldn't get a stable server to save your life across the first couple of weeks. Checking social media, and look, I was looking on the game's Reddit just before, right as I was writing all this stuff up, and the game is still very hard to get a game right now. A lot of people reporting disconnects, game crashes after the most recent patches.
There's definitely. I'm just speaking personally because I'm playing like 3 hours of this thing a day. It's a productivity killer when I've got my evenings to do other things. The main thing that I'm getting is that I'm getting lots of games, but there are occasional loading glitches. I don't think it's impossible for people to find games, but it's certainly becoming. It's still happening with too great a regularity that you'll load into a mission and you'll get the infinite loading drop pass glitch, which you and I
had that back in February,
yeah. So that's still going on. There's different other slight like visual bugs that are still occurring. So yeah, totally. I just wanted to clarify that people can still play the game properly. It's like those mission bugs are still happening.
No, and that's the thing. I want like a wide swath of issues, like because it's so easy to be like, oh my god, the game's dying, it's all over, whatever. And I think it is a much wider conversation. I think where it sits in PlayStation's library is fascinating. It's one of the only, or it is the only first-party live service game they've managed to get to go this big, especially for like a relatively new IP. Obviously, Helldivers 1 is 10 years old, but it's not like it was active at all. So to have such a thing blow up, I think it's then interesting looking at the way Sony want to manage it, get the PlayStation Network accounts on there, make sure we retain all those people on the PC side, and then what it means for them as a business. And then you have Arrowhead saying like, look, we're not going to run ourselves ragged trying to keep up with this thing. We didn't plan for this. And like you said, taking a well-deserved break, but that does lead to things like performance issues or maintenance of the game or whatever. I wanted to throw in, because you mentioned the meta before, I feel like Helldivers and the meta has become a whole thing. I know that meta as a term is a wider term anyway, in regards to, I guess like an easy version is how you're supposed to play the game-ish. But that's a whole thing. I wanted to throw a quote in from Trek Culture, or What Culture's own Chris Thompson, who, in response to the news doing the rounds that the game has lost players, said that he would get booted from every game he joined for not having the meta. That was his experience. The community killed itself.
That's mad. That's totally mad. I do think there's an interest. The one thing that I noticed when I was playing Helldivers was how great, how positive the experience was playing with people. It still is the case. Most people I'm playing with today are having a great time. But on the subject of like the games community on Reddit and what I've gotten on Discord, it's been very, very toxic. There's been a whole thing of like people have, and I think it comes down to the esportsification of shooter games and the fact that Helldivers kind of became so big and transcended its usual co-op niche. You had lots of people, I think, coming across from PvP games like Call of Duty, Overwatch, whatever other ones, and basically trying to sweat the game, where you like try and pick out like the best stratagems to do, but when really the whole point of playing Helldivers 2 is to have fun. It's a very irreverent approach. You're meant to just pick the things that make it enjoyable to you, and I know that there was kind of been loads and loads and loads and loads of criticism of the game's, enemy design, the way the difficulty stacks when you get to level 7 and above. Basically saying all these weapons are completely unviable, we're losing all the time, whatever. And I think people forgetting that the name of the game is Helldivers. Like, it's meant to be hard. Sometimes you're not meant to be able to finish missions, and I feel like there is a complete refusal to not not win. But I think at the same time, there's been, I know that Pilstat has said that on balancing they got things wrong, and that they want to make sure that more guns are more quote-unquote viable, which is totally fair. I think you should be making players more powerful and empowered, but I would say that the discourse around the balancing thing in those kind of the core online spaces, as it were, don't feel reflective to me of the player experience, but has definitely cast a bit of a shadow.
I think that's the thing, is that because when I was playing loads, it was across February, and then that was during all the server maintenance side of things, where it was a bit more patchy to just get a game at all. And then, like you said, the way that you play Helldivers is your things are landing on you, you're dying to hordes of aliens or whatever it is. Like, I was never taking it that seriously, but I'm never going to take any online game that seriously. But at the same time, it is interesting seeing something blow up this much, and then that assumption of how you're supposed to play, or it goes into those spaces where it's like, well, if we're going to be playing a live Sabres game regularly every day, every other week, then this is how we are all supposed to play, and then that getting in its own way. And it's like, how the hell does Arrowhead even try to communicate, hey, take this less seriously, without saying don't play every day?
It's difficult because it's the main vocal feedback they're getting, right? I think it was very good in that they stomped out that request to introduce PvP very early into the game's life cycle, when people were like, we need PvP, and they were like, no, we're doing a PvE co-op game, that's what we're doing. But I do think it's difficult when you've got such, that really hardcore shooter audience that are really into what's the right meta build, and how do you max your thing? How do you get the most amount of medals as quickly as possible? It's very difficult to communicate the ethos that you're not meant to win all the time, because people are so their chemistry has been rewired by these shooter games, these ultra competitive shooter games. YouTubers who come from that esports scene, Twitch streamers, Overwatch, hero shooters, things that have big kind of you need to be doing this amount of DPS per second. You need to make sure that you have this guy to help you. I feel like we've gotten away from the fact that this is just meant to be a fun time. And while I don't think it's behind the cause of a declining player count at all, because I do think that these communities are so microcosmic, and especially if you're playing on Steam, you're likely a hardcore gamer anyway, whereas people who are playing on console probably aren't as dialed into those conversations. It is interesting to me that aspect of its design became such a sticking point. I think the main thing right now is just the lack of stuff, the lack of constant rollout.
Yeah, I wanted to throw in the fact that they had to throw their roadmap out, whatever the hell that thing was initially, and then the way the Helldivers 2 did roll out, I actually really liked the idea that they kind of ended up pioneering this new way of doing a live service model, and which obviously the reality of that was just them scrabbling to put stuff together as and when they could. But they did have new enemy factions ostensibly ready to go in the first few weeks after launch. But then the way that they would do stuff, where they had the little news broadcasts, they were sort of addressing the player base as the Helldivers and using all the different terminology and everything else that was associated with the game. I thought that stuff was really, really cool. And then you could see some of the news broadcasts when you're on your ship and things like that. How has that stuff felt across the last few months?
They've really improved in this area, because at the start of when the game came out, if you have multiple defend campaigns, you've got major orders that are telling you to liberate certain planets or defending others, it can be very difficult to communicate and convey that. Because one of the things that wasn't really made noticeable at the start of the game was supply lines. So if you had a planet that you needed to defend, but you were already attacking a planet that they were attacking the defending planet from, you could liberate that planet and cut off supply lines to other things and actually do the defend order. But that wasn't made immediately clear. They've changed that now, so when you're in the Super Earth map, you can see which planet leads to what, how do you get the route through the galaxy or whatever. That's really good. I do think that there probably needs to be a more consistent way, because a lot of the discussion is handled on Discord, and it's that's not something I want to touch the 10-foot barge pole, to be honest. I know it's the gamer thing. I can't be asked wading into that.
I didn't even know it was. I know there's a wider bits and pieces about it.
I had my PHP forum era back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. That was enough.
Hey,
online.
Shout out to GameFAQs.
Yeah, that was enough. Unlike, I mean, may it rest in peace, because awful place. But I had that experience. So I guess the way that it's being unfurled right now is good. There was a whole thing the other month where there was a bug planet that we had to blow up, and we opened up a black hole, and people think that the Illuminate, who were the third faction in the original game, are going to come out the hole, and and mess everything up. So yeah, no, I just think it's in a bit of a weird holding pattern right now. Obviously, games have live service games, especially, you know, they ebb and flow in terms of popularity and interest. But I would hope that, you know, after a summer off, you know, they're able to bounce back and really hit the ground running in terms of these are the things we're going to be introducing. Because obviously there was loads of stuff that was data mined and leaked, like the vehicles. I think Sony literally leaked a new stratagem weapon the other day as well. I think there are certain tiny quality of life things that they could do to keep the hardcore more invested. And if you address that, then, you know, make it consistent. They will come if you build it.
Yeah. I think in a wider sense as well, like there is that whole idea of what a live service is in the modern day, where it's like, you know, there's the conversation around the amount of stuff that tops the charts, like the Fortnites, the GTA Onlines or whatever, and then trying to wedge yourself into that space, like Call of Duty as well. And if you manage to do that, then you get the wider assumption that you then need to have as much content or be as, you know, rolling as much stuff over as those bigger titles. And that just isn't possible with something like Helldivers 2 and Arrowhead. But I quite liked how much they got ahead of that and just said, like you said, they're not doing PvP. You know, this is going to be the rollout to a degree without being able to put specific dates on it. And to me, I kind of just understood that. I was like, cool, you're a tiny team who've blown up, or tiny, you know, in comparatively. That's awesome. I'll give you guys a minute and see what happens in a good few months. But I do think it's interesting. It's nothing against the people who do want to spend that much time on the game. I just think it's fascinating that we occasionally have something blow up out of nowhere, and it's like, right, that's what I'm going to play every day, and they have to try and match me, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm happy to play with scraps, to be honest, because I think the game just plays brilliantly, and I'm still having really good emergent narrative experiences when I play. The only concern that I have is, you know, momentum is a big thing in live service games. Like, I played the hell out of Multiverses when it first came out, and then it disappeared for a year, and I re-downloaded it, but
they got that relaunched.
They took my stuff. I'm Lionel Hutz right now with the knife being like, where's my stuff? It's gone, and I'm not going to replay that game because that was another chapter of my gaming life, and I've got too many things to play, Scott.
Yeah, man, but I think that's a whole other thing, is that we're weighed down by everything else in the industry. I forgot Multiverses came back out, effed over the rest of its player base, and then just seemed to slink Homer hedge itself away into the distance again.
Okay.
Just taking as many purchases as they could. But yeah, the state of Helldivers 2, I think, it just feels like it should exist. It should be a nice, strongly received thing with a positive word of mouth. And for the most point, it is. I think overall, this isn't a doom and gloom thing. It's just a reality of the project thing. And hopefully that, you know, comes through.